Emily Blackwood stood at the balcony of their penthouse suite, her hands gently resting on her growing belly, the city skyline stretching endlessly before her. At 28, she often found herself overwhelmed by gratitude. Married to Daniel Blackwood, one of the wealthiest and most powerful businessmen in the country, she had everything she had once only dreamed of. Their mansion was the envy of many, her closet filled with designer dresses, and her life the subject of glossy magazine admiration. But what filled her heart most wasn't the luxury or the spotlight, it was the tiny heartbeat inside her. Emily had always wanted to be a mother. Her childhood had been modest but filled with love, and she had promised herself she would give her child the same kind of nurturing, no matter how opulent their world was. Every morning, she'd talk to her unborn baby while sipping her herbal tea. "You're going to have a beautiful life," she would whisper. "You'll be safe. You'll be loved." She believed it with every fiber of her being. From the outside, the Blackwoods were the epitome of elegance and success. Daniel, at 35, was a striking figure, charismatic, powerful, always dressed in sharp suits and followed by an air of control. Emily admired his ambition, his ability to conquer boardrooms and dominate headlines. He was her protector, her provider, her partner, or so she had believed. Lately, though, something had shifted. Emily tried to ignore the chill that had crept into their marriage, brushing off the excuses he gave when he came home late, back-to-back meetings, business trips, sudden dinners with investors. He was always tired, distracted, distant. The warmth in his eyes when he looked at her had dulled, and kisses had turned into nods. He no longer lingered in bed beside her, or touched her belly with that amazed wonder he once had. At first, she blamed herself. Maybe it was the pregnancy. Maybe she was too emotional, too needy. Maybe he was just stressed from work. But then there were the phone calls, ones that ended the moment she walked into the room. The faint scent of unfamiliar perfume on his jacket. The secretive text messages that flashed and disappeared when she glanced at his phone. Emily tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was just paranoid, hormonal, overthinking. Still, she couldn't shake the unease settling in her chest. One evening, while Daniel was out claiming to be at a conference dinner, Emily wandered into his home office. Her fingers trembled as she stared at his laptop. She hesitated, her conscience warring with her fear. But curiosity, no, desperation, won. She opened his email. Most of it was work-related, nothing unusual. But then she saw the folder labeled personal, and within it, an email chain with a name she didn't recognize. Vanessa. The messages were flirtatious at first, then passionate. Photos, plans, words he had once spoken to Emily, now written for someone else. She couldn't breathe. Her vision blurred, and the blood drained from her face. She closed the laptop, her hands clammy and shaking. For several minutes, she sat frozen in the leather chair, unable to move. The truth, ugly, heavy, undeniable, had revealed itself. When she finally crawled into bed that night, she didn't cry. She stared at the ceiling, her hands resting on her belly, trying to process what this meant. Could she confront him? Would he deny it? And if he admitted it, then what? She didn't have the answers. All she had was the steady beat of her child's heartbeat in her mind, the one reason she had to hold herself together. In the days that followed, Emily clung to the routine. She smiled when she had to, attended charity events, took prenatal yoga classes. But inside, something was crumbling. Her dreams of family, of raising a child in love, of growing old with a man she adored, were being slowly strangled by reality. She would often sit in the nursery they'd begun designing together and run her fingers across the tiny onesies and teddy bears, trying to imagine a world where this child could still feel safe, could still be happy, even if everything else was falling apart. And through it all, Emily kept hoping, hoping she was wrong, hoping it was a phase, hoping Daniel would come back to her, to them. She didn't know that the unraveling had already begun, and the life she thought was perfect was built on a foundation about to collapse. It happened on a rainy Wednesday afternoon. Emily had returned early from her prenatal checkup, wanting to surprise Daniel with the ultrasound printout she held in her hand. Their baby had hiccuped during the scan, and it made her laugh out loud in the exam room. For a moment, she had imagined the three of them together, her, Daniel, and their little one, smiling and whole again. Maybe things would change. Maybe the distance between them would close. She held onto that fragile hope as she stepped into the quiet mansion. She didn't expect laughter, feminine, flirtatious, echoing from the upstairs bedroom. Confused, Emily walked softly down the hallway, her heart beginning to pound. Daniel wasn't supposed to be home yet. She followed the sound, her fingers tightening around the envelope with the ultrasound. The voices became clearer, undeniable. A woman's sultry giggle. Daniel's low chuckle. Her stomach twisted. Still, she needed to see it. Needed proof. Needed the last shred of doubt to disappear. She pushed the bedroom door open without knocking. Time stopped. There, on the bed she had shared with her husband for the past 5 years, lay Daniel, shirtless and laughing. Draped across him was a stunning young woman in a silk robe, her long legs intertwined with his. She was beautiful in that perfectly polished, curated way. Long lashes, manicured nails, lips glossed and curved in a wicked smile. The kind of woman who lived on Instagram, who posed with champagne flutes and designer handbags and millions of followers praising her every move. And she was here. In her bed. With her husband. Daniel's smile vanished the second he saw Emily. Emily didn't say a word at first. She stood frozen in the doorway, drenched in disbelief. Her breath caught, her hands trembling, still clutching the envelope with their child's image. Her face crumbled as the weight of the betrayal hit her like a tidal wave. "Emily," Daniel muttered, sitting up. "How long?" Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like glass. Daniel didn't answer. The woman, Vanessa, sat up beside him, unfazed. "Long enough," she said with a smirk. "But not long enough for you to get the hint." Emily's eyes snapped toward Daniel, searching for remorse, for shame, for anything that resembled the man she married. But his face had turned stone cold. Not a flicker of guilt. Just annoyance. "You weren't supposed to be home yet," he said flatly. Emily's throat burned. "And what? You thought I wouldn't find out? That you could keep living this double life?" Daniel stood slowly, adjusting his shirt. "I didn't think it mattered anymore." "What are you saying?" she whispered, the room spinning. He stepped closer, his expression unrecognizable. "I never wanted this pregnancy, Emily. You knew that. You pushed it. You trapped me with it." Emily's knees weakened. "Trapped you?" she repeated in disbelief. "Daniel, this is our child." "No," he snapped. "This is your dream. Not mine." Behind him, Vanessa chuckled, standing now, her robe falling slightly to reveal too much. "God, no wonder he's been so miserable," she sneered. "You're so clingy. So vanilla." Emily turned to her, her pain morphing into fury. "You don't belong here." Vanessa shrugged, walking toward her with deliberate arrogance. "But I am here. And guess what? I'm not going anywhere. You are." Emily looked to Daniel, begging with her eyes for him to stop this. To choose her. To remember the life they built. But he didn't move. Didn't speak. Just crossed his arms. "You should leave," he said finally, his voice devoid of emotion. A silence fell. The kind that only comes before something is destroyed. Emily's tears slipped down her cheeks as she stepped backward, her heart shattering with each breath. "You're throwing away your wife, your child, for her?" Vanessa walked to the door, opening it wide. "Don't make it dramatic, sweetheart. You're just the warm-up act." Emily stared at the two of them, so smug, so cruel, and realized this was no mistake. This was calculated. Deliberate. Her presence, her pain, didn't matter to them at all. She turned and walked out, her footsteps echoing in the hollow halls of the mansion she had once called home. The envelope slipped from her hand as she reached the front door, fluttering silently to the floor. And not once did Daniel stop her. Not once did he call her name. The silence in the car was unbearable. Emily sat in the back seat, her hands protectively cradling her belly, trying not to cry. Daniel was behind the wheel, jaw clenched and eyes fixed ahead, while Vanessa lounged in the passenger seat, scrolling through her phone with a satisfied smirk. They hadn't told her where they were going, only that some space would be good for her, that she needed time to cool off, that she was too emotional to stay at the mansion. Emily had resisted at first, but something in Daniel's voice told her this wasn't a conversation, it was a command. The farther they drove from the city, the darker the surroundings grew. No streetlights, no buildings, just endless stretches of road flanked by shadowy trees. Emily's stomach twisted. This wasn't a trip to a spa. This wasn't about rest. "Where are we?" she finally asked, her voice thin and shaky. Daniel didn't answer. Vanessa turned halfway in her seat, her face illuminated briefly by the light of her phone. "Somewhere peaceful," she said with fake sweetness. "You said you needed clarity. Fresh air. A change of perspective." Emily's heart thudded painfully. The car slowed as they turned down a narrow gravel road, thick woods crowding in on both sides. There was no sign of another vehicle, no buildings, no people. Just darkness and the hum of tires crunching over stone. The car came to a sudden stop. Daniel stepped out first and popped the trunk. Emily hesitated, fear finally overtaking confusion. "Daniel, what is this?" she asked. He didn't respond. He reached in, pulled out her small suitcase, the one Vanessa had packed, and tossed it carelessly onto the side of the road. Vanessa got out next, stretching like she was bored. "This is your stop," she said, leaning against the car and inspecting her nails. "Enjoy the fresh air." Emily slowly opened her door and stepped out, her legs trembling. "You can't be serious." Daniel avoided her eyes. "You'll figure it out," he said stiffly. "You're strong, right? Independent." "Daniel," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "I'm pregnant. What am I supposed to do out here?" "You'll manage," Vanessa answered for him. "Plenty of women do. You wanted to keep the baby. That was your choice." Emily stared at the two of them, disbelief flooding her chest. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be real. But it was. The taillights flared as Daniel got back into the car. Vanessa blew her a mocking kiss before climbing in as well. "Good luck," she called out through the window. The car began to pull away, the gravel kicking up dust as it disappeared down the road. Emily stood frozen, her suitcase beside her, the only sound the engine fading into the night. Then came the rain. A sudden downpour, cold and unrelenting, drenched her within seconds. She dropped to her knees beside the suitcase, her hands clutching her belly as tears streamed down her face. Her baby kicked gently inside her, a reminder that she wasn't entirely alone. She didn't know how long she sat there, soaked and shivering, when headlights suddenly appeared in the distance. She shielded her eyes, panic flashing. Was it Daniel again? Had he come back? The vehicle slowed as it approached, a large, rusty pickup truck. It screeched to a halt a few feet from her, narrowly missing her. The driver's door flew open, and an older man jumped out, followed by a woman in a raincoat. "Are you all right?" the man shouted over the rain. Emily couldn't even answer. She just sobbed. The woman rushed over, kneeling beside her. "Oh my God, she's pregnant. Help me get her in the truck." Within seconds, they had her and her suitcase inside, wrapping her in a blanket, offering warm words and soft comfort. The woman stroked her hair as Emily collapsed against her shoulder, exhausted and broken. "You're safe now," she whispered. "We've got you." And for the first time in hours, Emily let herself believe it. The farmhouse smelled of fresh bread and lavender the first morning Emily woke up there. Her body ached from the long night on the road, her limbs stiff and her mind foggy with exhaustion. But the warmth of the hand-stitched quilt wrapped around her and the soft morning light filtering through the lace curtains gave her something she hadn't felt in weeks. Peace. For a few precious moments, she forgot where she was and what had happened. Then the memories returned in a crushing wave. Daniel's betrayal. Vanessa's cruel smile. The car pulling away, leaving her in the rain like she was nothing. She touched her belly instinctively. The baby moved. Still with her. Still alive. That was all that mattered now. Martha knocked softly on the door and peeked inside with a tray of food. "You're awake. I made some oatmeal and tea," she said kindly, setting it down on the nightstand. Her voice was warm, motherly. "You need to keep your strength up, sweetheart." Emily tried to sit up. I don't want to be a burden," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Nonsense," Martha said, waving her hand. "George and I aren't in the habit of leaving young pregnant women on the side of the road. You stay as long as you need." George, her husband, was a quiet but gentle man with weathered hands and a heart full of patience. Together, they lived on a small piece of land just outside the nearest town, running a modest farm with a few animals, vegetable patches, and enough space for privacy. Something Emily desperately needed. She told them her name was Emma, not Emily. Left out her last name. When they asked why she had been out there alone, she just said she'd left a bad situation. That was all. They didn't pry. Weeks passed. Emily stayed in the guest room, ate meals with them, and gradually began to help around the farm. Martha taught her how to knead dough, how to collect eggs from the hens without getting pecked, and how to tend to the garden. At first, her body resisted, aching feet, a sore back, nausea that clung to her every morning. But over time, she began to feel stronger. There was something healing in the simplicity of the work, in the rhythm of the farm. The quiet. The dirt beneath her nails. The way the sun warmed her skin and the wind whispered through the fields. She wrote in a journal at night, sometimes to her baby, sometimes to herself. Letters she'd never send to Daniel. Thoughts she couldn't share with anyone else. She wondered what would happen if the press found her. If Daniel would try to spin the story, deny everything, or worse, pretend to care. But no one came. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't have to pretend to be perfect. She was just Emma, a woman finding her way back from heartbreak. As the days shortened and autumn rolled in, Emily's belly grew heavier. George built a wooden rocking chair for her to sit on the porch. Martha began knitting tiny sweaters. They never asked who the father was, never judged her silence. They simply cared. When labor finally came, it was long and difficult. Martha stayed by her side through every scream, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, whispering encouragement. George waited outside, pacing nervously with a hot cup of coffee in hand. And then, at dawn, the cries of new life filled the little farmhouse. Emily looked down at the baby in her arms, red-faced, wailing, perfect, and felt something break open inside her. A rush of love, fierce and overwhelming, flooded every part of her being. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "His name is Eli." Martha smiled gently. "That's beautiful. Does it mean something?" Emily nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "It means strength." In that moment, watching her son curl his tiny fingers around hers, Emily knew she was not the same woman who had been left in the rain. She had been broken, yes, but not destroyed. With every sunrise on the farm, every quiet moment of growth, she had been rebuilding. Not just for her child, but for herself. And Eli would grow up not in a mansion, but in a place filled with truth, kindness, and the kind of strength that could never be bought. The years moved quietly on the farm, marked by changing seasons and the small milestones of a growing child. Emily, still going by Emma in the outside world, had found a rhythm to life that felt both unfamiliar and grounding. But beneath the calm surface, a fire still burned. It wasn't just the lingering ache of betrayal or the humiliation of being left alone, it was the desire to rise. Not just to survive, but to become something more. Something unshakable. She owed it to Eli, and she owed it to herself. While Eli napped or played in the garden, Emily studied. At first, it was just online classes, basic business principles, marketing, social media strategies. Then she began to consume everything she could about e-commerce, branding, and design. Her natural eye for beauty and detail, combined with the therapeutic experience of redecorating her small room and Martha's farmhouse, sparked an idea: home decor. Pieces that felt elegant but meaningful, comforting, powerful. She began sketching at night, crafting prototypes from local materials, slowly building a collection. She poured herself into the work, her creativity fueled by memory and emotion, by everything she had lost and everything she was determined to build. With help from anonymous platforms and a private virtual assistant she hired under a fake identity, Emily launched her brand under the name Eli plus Ember. The name was symbolic: Eli, for her son, and Ember, for the fire that still burned inside her. She never put her face to the brand. Everything was sleek, minimal, and emotionally resonant. Her designs, candles in earthy tones, handmade vases, calming textiles, evoked a sense of serenity and resilience. People responded instantly. Orders poured in. Influencers began featuring her products. She reinvested every penny, expanded her production, hired a discreet team, all while maintaining total anonymity. Within 2 years, Eli plus Ember became a top-rated home decor brand on multiple platforms. Retail stores began inquiring. Major publications praised the brand's mysterious founder and heartfelt aesthetic. But Emily wasn't chasing fame. She was building something deeper. A quiet empire that couldn't be traced back to the woman Daniel Blackwood had thrown away. In the background, Emily kept tabs on him. Not obsessively, but enough. She subscribed to industry newsletters, followed the financial pages, listened when Martha brought in the occasional newspaper from town. And slowly, Daniel Blackwood's kingdom began to crumble. At first, it was whispers, internal conflicts, delayed payments, high-level resignations. Then came a PR scandal, a leaked video of Daniel berating a junior employee during a board meeting. The footage went viral, painting him as a tyrant. Clients dropped out. Investors began pulling away. Vanessa didn't help. Her extravagant spending, flashy parties, and thirst for attention attracted all the wrong headlines. She began flaunting her position like royalty on borrowed power. But her charm had an expiration date. Within months, Blackwood Enterprises faced serious liquidity issues. Emily watched from the shadows with a strange sense of calm. This wasn't revenge, it was justice unfolding naturally. But still, she wanted control. She reached out to a discreet group of investors, women she had met through online forums and entrepreneurship networks. Women who, like her, knew what it was to be dismissed. Through shell companies and silent partners, Emily began purchasing shares and bonds connected to Daniel's assets. At first, small moves, just enough to avoid suspicion. Then she went bigger. Property liens. Patent licensing. Anything with value tied to his name. Her investors trusted her. And she never let them see her face. Every transaction was clean, legal, and silent. And every one of them brought her closer to the day she could look at everything Daniel had once owned and know, quietly, that it now belonged to her. Emily didn't tell Martha or George everything, but they knew enough to understand that she had become someone powerful. Eli, now a bright and joyful boy of 5, often played beside her desk as she responded to client emails or reviewed supplier contracts. He didn't know the full story, but he knew his mother was strong. He knew she built something from nothing. He knew she never gave up. And that's what mattered. The woman who once stood trembling in the rain had disappeared. In her place was someone sharp, composed, and unstoppable. Emily hadn't just rebuilt her life, she had rewritten it. On her terms. With her name hidden and her influence growing by the day, she waited patiently for the moment when the final piece would fall into place. She didn't want Daniel to suffer for her. She wanted him to see her success and realize he had thrown away the very thing he could never replace. The ballroom shimmered with gold chandeliers and polished marble, filled with the usual crowd of high-powered investors, influencers, and industry elites. Everyone was dressed to impress, wine glasses in hand, smiles carefully rehearsed. Emily stood near the back, sipping sparkling water, her presence quiet yet commanding. She wore a sleek black gown, her hair swept into a low chignon, makeup soft but sculpted. She had changed so much in the last few years, physically, emotionally, completely, that even in a room filled with former acquaintances, no one recognized her. And that's exactly how she wanted it. The invitation had arrived through one of her silent partners, a private meet and mingle for luxury investors. Emily had almost declined. But when she saw that Blackwood Enterprises was listed as a featured guest, and that Daniel would be speaking, she knew fate had handed her the perfect opportunity. She didn't go alone. One of her trusted business allies, a fierce CEO named Julia Tate, walked beside her as her guest, though it was clear Emily was the power behind the curtain. Her heels clicked softly on the marble floor as she moved through the crowd, drawing the occasional glance from curious strangers. Something about her was magnetic. Graceful, composed, and confident. Then she saw them. Daniel stood near the bar, suit crisp, smile forced. The lines on his face were deeper now. Stress had aged him. Vanessa hung on his arm in a sparkling dress far too loud for the event. Her laugh was sharp, nervous. Emily didn't feel hate anymore. What she felt was clarity. She waited until Daniel glanced around, clearly searching for someone important. That's when she approached. "Daniel Blackwood," she said smoothly, extending her hand. He turned and took it, his eyes flicking up and down, searching for a memory that didn't register. "Yes, and you are?" "Emma Stone," she replied with a calm smile. "I represent a group of private investors. We've been watching your company." Vanessa narrowed her eyes but stayed silent. "I've never heard of your group," Daniel said cautiously. "We stay off the radar. But I've been impressed by your early work, Mr. Blackwood. It's unfortunate what's happened lately. PR nightmares, the debt, the pending lawsuits. It must be exhausting." Daniel's jaw tightened. "We're restructuring," he said stiffly. "Nothing we can't manage." Emily tilted her head slightly, feigning sympathy. "That's the thing. We're looking for projects to rescue. Underestimated brands with untapped potential." Vanessa straightened up, flashing a rehearsed smile. "We've had a few rough quarters, but Daniel's genius always turns things around. Maybe your firm could help." Emily smiled again. "Maybe. I'd need to take a closer look. Deep dive into the company's bones." Daniel leaned in, intrigued. "What exactly is it that you do?" "Oh, I rebuild things," she replied with a glint in her eye. "Especially things that were once beautiful. Things that were neglected, discarded, treated like they didn't matter." Something flickered across Daniel's face, a faint unease. Emily could tell he was trying to place her. Her voice. Her eyes. But the disguise held. Until she decided to drop it. She stepped closer. "You know," she said softly, "there was a time you had something truly valuable. Priceless, even. And you threw it away for something shinier. Something easy." Daniel stared at her now, frowning. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a small envelope, the same kind she had once carried from a doctor's office. She handed it to him. He opened it. Inside was a photo, his child. Eli, at 4 years old, smiling in a field of wildflowers, sunlight in his hair. Daniel's hands shook. "Wait," Vanessa snapped, stepping forward. "What is this? Who are you?" Emily met her gaze directly. "You don't recognize me?" she asked, her voice suddenly hardening. "That's okay. I don't expect people like you to remember those you destroy." Daniel's face turned pale. "Emily." "Bingo," she said, her smile sharp. For a long second, silence reigned. Vanessa's mouth opened and closed, stunned into speechlessness. Daniel reached toward her, but Emily stepped back. "I came here to see what you looked like now that your empire is rotting," she said, her voice calm. "And I wanted you to know that I could have saved you. I could have bought your company, fixed your mess, made you look like a success again." Daniel's voice cracked. "Emily, please." "But I won't," she cut in. "Because some things aren't worth saving." With that, she turned and walked away, her heels clicking like punctuation marks to a story that had just ended. And she never looked back. The studio lights were bright but warm, and the room felt intimate despite the presence of cameras, producers, and curious crew members. Emily sat poised in her seat, wearing a soft cream blouse and simple gold necklace. She looked elegant, but not flashy, exactly the image she had crafted for this moment. Across from her sat the host of one of the most watched digital interview shows in the country, known for telling raw, emotional stories that connected with millions. And now, it was Emily's turn. She had thought long and hard before agreeing to the interview. 4 years, she had kept her story locked away, buried beneath the surface of her brand's success. Eli plus Ember had grown into a multi-million-dollar company, featured in luxury design magazines and backed by top-tier investors. Yet no one knew who Emma Stone really was. Until now. I think a lot of women will relate to your journey, the host said gently as the cameras rolled. But few have turned pain into power the way you have. Can you share what started it all? Emily took a deep breath, steadying herself. I was in love with someone who didn't love me back. At least, not the way I deserved. I was pregnant. I thought we were building a life together. And then one day, he chose someone else. He left me, literally left me, on the side of a road. The audience, silent and hanging on to every word, gasped. The host leaned in. He abandoned you? Yes, Emily said, her voice steady but heavy. With nothing but a suitcase and a baby on the way. I had no money, no plan, and no support. But a kind couple took me in. I gave birth on a small farm. And in that stillness, in that healing, I decided I would never depend on anyone like that again. She didn't name Daniel. She didn't have to. The internet didn't need a name to go digging. The interview went live the next morning. Within hours, it had over 3 million views. Within days, it had become a cultural moment. Headlines exploded. Mysterious decor mogul reveals harrowing backstory. She was left pregnant and alone. Now she owns an empire. TikToks, reaction videos, editorials. Everyone had something to say. Women cried, cheered, and rallied behind her. Survivors of abuse, betrayal, and abandonment shared their own stories. Emily became a symbol, not of tragedy, but of transformation. And her brand. It soared. Eli plus Ember saw a 300% spike in sales. Retailers placed urgent reorders. Her story became part of the packaging, handwritten notes of strength, empowerment, and healing. Celebrities began requesting collaborations. She was invited to speak at women's conferences and entrepreneurship panels. She had created something real, and now, the world saw the face behind it. Meanwhile, Daniel was spiraling. He had seen the interview within hours of its release. He had sat frozen in his office, watching the woman he once called his wife reclaim her story without even saying his name. But it didn't matter. People guessed. They compared timelines. Anonymous sources filled in the blanks. The media hounded him for comments. He tried to release a statement, calling her story one-sided, but the public backlash was swift and brutal. Investors pulled out. Clients backed away. And Vanessa, whose Instagram influence was already on shaky ground, cut ties and vanished. She posted a vague breakup caption, deleted all photos with Daniel, and moved on to the next rich target. Daniel was left alone, publicly shamed, his once pristine legacy reduced to a cautionary tale. And then came the final blow. Blackwood Manor, the estate where Emily had once lived, was listed for foreclosure. Daniel had tried everything to save it, bridge loans, restructured debt, but nothing worked. When the auction date was announced, Emily quietly made her move. She didn't show up herself. Her lawyer handled the purchase. When the sale closed, Daniel found out like everyone else, through a news alert. The woman he had thrown away now owned the house he had ruined her in. Reporters asked if she would live there, if she was exacting revenge. Emily didn't answer directly. Instead, she held a small press event weeks later, standing in front of the newly renamed Eli Haven. This house once represented wealth and power, she told the crowd. But now, it will represent safety, dignity, hope. Eli Haven will serve as a shelter and rehabilitation center for women who've experienced domestic abuse and betrayal. No woman should ever be left on a road with nowhere to go. Now, they'll have a place to begin again. The audience erupted in applause. Emily stood tall, her son Eli beside her, his hand in hers. Daniel watched it all from a distance, surrounded by silence. Emily didn't need vengeance. She had already won. The late afternoon sun bathed the old Blackwood estate in a warm golden hue, casting long shadows across the now renovated lawn. Where there was once a grand iron gate that seemed to guard a fortress of pride and betrayal, there now stood a modest wooden archway carved with the words, Eli Haven. Children's laughter floated through the air from the garden in the back, where volunteers helped families tend vegetables, paint murals, and share stories. Life pulsed through the mansion now. Not with opulence, but with hope. Emily stood just beyond the front steps, her hand gently resting on her son's shoulder. Eli, now 7 years old, looked up at the building in awe. "Is this where you used to live, Mom?" he asked, his voice full of innocent wonder.